We're live.
Cool.
All right. If anyone has joined before I can actually go and check to see if people have joined, welcome to another LinkedIn Live. This is Scotty John's LinkedIn, obviously. That's where you're watching this. I've got Kelly Sanchez, the head of talent acquisition at DigiCert, my bi-weekly conversation partner with me today. Kelly, thank you again for coming back.
Yeah, absolutely.
I haven't scared you off yet. That's always a good sign.
Right. Or I'm just too crazy and I just keep coming back, one or the other.
So for anybody who's new to this, we basically, this is kind of an Ask Me Anything format. We start with a topic and we've got some planned things to discuss in case nobody has questions. But if you do have questions, please feel free to pop them into the comments section. What we're going to talk about today is interview etiquette. And we're going to tackle this from a couple of different angles. We're going to start with interview etiquette for hiring managers and companies, because as most likely anybody watching this knows, it is a crazy competitive market. And we're hopeful that we can give you some tips on how to, show up and make sure you're putting your best foot forward to attract and then start retaining. I would argue that you start retaining talent right from the interview process. So that's what we're going to talk about. Per usual, I've got to navigate to where I can go see what your questions actually are. So I'm going to put myself on mute. Kelly is going to start us off with a little activity here, and I'll be right back. All right, Kelly, take it away.
Hey, thanks, Scotty. So we start our videos with a question while Scotty is figuring out the tech stuff. So for this week, I will choose a card and let's see what we get. All right. So this card says, what is your least favorite chore? Like, I have a couple. Like, do I just have to name one? But what is my least favorite? I would say the dishes. Oh my gosh, I hate the dishes. I can do it, obviously, dishwasher and everything, but after like a long day of cooking, or your partner's cooking and then you just see all the dishes, I don't want to do dishes. That is a chore that I hate a lot. Or my least favorite. Hate is a very strong word, but yeah.
All right, so I'm going to go with this one. Actually used to be one of my favorite chores, but it's become one of my least favorite chores. So, for the handful of people watching, you guys might already know this about me, but if there's anybody who isn't aware, I actually live up Big Cottonwood Canyon here outside of Salt Lake City, Utah. So for those of you who aren't, Utah natives or here in Utah, that's actually, it's actually a lot less glamorous than it sounds, but it's up one of the canyons where there's a couple of ski resorts nearby. So in other words, we get a ton of snow. And I used to absolutely love snow removal because it was like, oh yeah, I get to play in the snow. This is the best. And we've been up here for almost a decade and the novelty has worn off. And now there's so much snow. And the worst part is like, I'd way rather be like out actually playing in the snow than like sitting and, and removing it. So, and that involves a lot. Definitely one of the chores that I get, in terms of delegating chores. That's one that I've just taken on. So yeah, it used to be awesome. Now it's by far my least favorite. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is too much.
And to add, you're in the mountain. That is not just like a couple of feet of snow that you get down here in the valley. That is like as tall as you were taller. So yeah, I can understand why you hate it.
Over the course of the season, absolutely. And yeah, there've been some storms where it's just like, oh my gosh, I'm going to die. This is crazy. So anyway, and just for anybody who might be thinking, well, come on, dummy, go get a snowblower. I did invest in that. That is definitely a thing, but there's a lot of areas, outdoor areas that you just can't get a snowblower into. So I'm talking about using a shovel. Anyhow, all right. Well, thanks for that, Kelly. So back to our topic for those of you who maybe didn't see the opening. here with Kelly Sanchez, the head of talent acquisition at DigiCert, my bi-weekly conversation partner. We are going to talk about interview etiquette. And like I mentioned, we're going to take this from the side of the hiring manager or company to begin with. We'll talk a little bit about the candidate side as well. But if you have any questions as it relates specifically to interview etiquette, or frankly, any other questions for a couple of experienced recruiters, feel free to pop them into the comments. I actually did just get a question. So before we jump into what we had planned, Kelly, let's address this. So, okay, I've recently seen some posts about companies having too strenuous of an interview process. I'm curious as to the types of conversations either of you may have had with clients or candidates. So what he's referring to when he says clients is the company side, right? And then candidates, of course, the people that are interviewing for these jobs. What do you think, Kelly? That's a great question, by the way.
That is. And when you say strenuous, I'm thinking like, is it like 8 interviews plus or something, because it's a long time on both sides, the candidate and the recruiting. I'm thinking also what could make it strenuous is maybe there's a lot of assignments or tests or assessments. So yes, I think you definitely need more than 1 or 2 interviews. Absolutely. From like either recruiting team, the hiring manager, potentially maybe like a panel as well to assess. But I think if it's 8 plus, like, well, I don't know, like, why do you have someone, a recruiting team recruiting people if they're getting to that many interviews? Honestly, like they're missing the mark somewhere. So you have to realign, redirect, and figure out, because it is, in my opinion, that's a lot of interviews and a lot of time.
Well, and so, yeah, I mean, I've definitely heard that and I've experienced it like we talked about in the past. So what I do is, quote unquote, third party recruiting. So what we do is we go out and we find candidates that you can never refer to these people as applicants because we are proactively recruiting them. Right. And, with regard to a strenuous process, it's a delicate balancing act. And the reason this is a very timely topic, Kelly, that we're talking about is because the market is extraordinarily tight for talent, right? At least in the case of many kind of quote unquote knowledge work areas, particularly IT, finance. I'm sure you've got insight into some of the others that are as well. So when you get somebody that you go out and proactively reach out to, and then you put them through the ringer and kind of, in some ways it's about your attitude as a hiring group. What are you putting out there in terms of, is this person's lucky to be, in this position to come to work for us because we're such a great company. And I think that's what we want to check a little bit here today. I absolutely think that too strenuous of a process is a problem. You mentioned the 8 meetings. I would add to that, again, multiple assessments throughout the process. It's kind of an either or, right? If you're going to do 2 assessments in a technical interview process, for instance, then I would argue you probably better do like 1 or 2 interviews and call it, like make a decision at that point. So yeah, great question. And absolutely, from a candidate side, I've heard, more that the strenuous interview is a bit of a turnoff. And especially those proactive candidates, the people who have been reached out to either by an internal recruiter or by a third party recruiter and put into a company's process, you have to strike a balance and sell them on why they want to come into this position and why they want to work for your company while vetting them. And that's tough, right? That's a tough balancing act. And again, I think that's part of why we want to talk about this today, because there's some tips and tricks on how to do that as far as I'm concerned. So, again, it's a great question. And, I'm biased. I think you do want to obviously vet the people that you're considering coming to work for you. But, again, I think that it's really about delivery. It's about how you're approaching them more so than the process itself. That's kind of my bottom line for that question. Anything else that you would add with regard to that, Kelly?
No, and it's going to vary again from company to company. I can only speak to the ones that I've worked with and from experience and from colleagues as well that I've heard. But yeah, there's some companies that's what they want. That's their requirement. And to your point, if the recruiter or the hiring manager is able to set up that expectation at the beginning, as a candidate, I would feel, okay, I'm preparing myself for 8 rounds, but I really want to be a part of it. This is the process and it is what it is. So expectation communication is always going to be key in that scenario.
Yeah. So you're getting into our tips, right? And I agree with you. I think that setting expectations is a huge part of this process. And it's probably the most critical part. I would also argue that on the first meeting, where it's more of a getting to know you, almost like a cultural fit type of a thing, that's where you want to do a little bit of selling, right? You're going to set expectations about what the process will look like if somebody successfully makes it. But you also want to make sure that you're, as a hiring manager or a recruiter, that you're highlighting all of the reasons why any person would want to work for your company, your team, in this tech stack. Again, I'm technology focused, so I always look at it through that lens. But I think that the front end of the process, you really want to lean a little more heavily towards selling a person on why they should come to work. But again, to your point, Kelly, set the expectation that there'll still be some vetting that has to happen. And of course, most people would expect that. But again, if you've reached out to someone and they didn't apply, or they didn't, they weren't necessarily looking for a job, it is critical. And I just think people forget sometimes that how important that is, right? To kind of sell and set the expectation up front.
Yep.
Awesome question. I love it. All right. So real quick, I see we've got some people who've joined us here. If you're just joining us, welcome back to another LinkedIn Live. I've got Kelly Sanchez, the head of talent acquisition at DigiCert, my biweekly conversation partner. I'm, of course, Scotty John. We are talking today about interview etiquette, and particularly kind of looking at this from the hiring manager or the company lens. But by virtue of that, we'll get into some content around, what to do as a candidate as well. This is an Ask Me Anything format. So if you have questions, and it's like I couldn't have queued that up better because we just got another one. Please pop them into the comments section. So Kelly, we got another.
Okay.
So we actually didn't get a question. We got a comment. So I think now might be the time, if everyone here will bear with me, just to address a very polarizing topic in my personal life, which is my hair. I have some friends and family who think it's great, and then I have some friends and family who think it's terrible. One of my best buddies was like, "Dude, it's terrible. Like, you've got to cut it. You look awful." So I just want to publicly proclaim to, again, the handful of people watching, and this video will live on LinkedIn and now on YouTube forever. So I'm going to publicly proclaim that my goal here is to go another, 2, 3, 5 inches. I'm not sure how much. I need a total of 10 inches that I can donate to Locks of Love. And that's my goal. So 10 inches of hair I can actually cut off my head. And unfortunately, I don't look good with a shaved head. So I'm going to have to cut it off. So that's what I'm doing for all those out there who are like, "Man, you look awful. Just come on." That's.
I love it. I did that one year. It's been a while, but it's awesome to just cut it off, and then it's a new look. It's a new you.
There you go. And you probably didn't cut all the way off, so you must have had a lot of hair to donate. That's awesome. I love it.
Yeah.
All right, very good. So back to the topic at hand. We're talking about interview etiquette. Again, if you have any questions as it relates to whether you're in a hiring position or you're actually interviewing for a job yourself, please pop them into the comments section. So Kelly, getting into kind of the nitty gritty here. So we've got, you've got different types of interviews, obviously. You have a phone interview, you have a video interview, which a lot of us are living in that world still. and probably going to for the foreseeable future. And then you've got an in-person interview, and I don't know that things change all that much as it relates to those different, forums, if you will. But I guess when it comes to like actually coming into an interview, and again, thinking about it from the hiring manager side, what do you think are some, we've talked about setting expectations, and we've talked about kind of selling somebody, especially if they're more of a passive candidate.
Mm-hmm.
What other tips and tricks do you have, or recommendations do you have for somebody who's in the hiring seat? And then we've got a question that we'll address here in a sec.
Yeah. So in addition to what you mentioned, I would say be prepared. So review the resume, highlight things that you're curious about, and ask questions as it relates to the position that they're coming in for. Because a candidate can tell if you're not prepared and you're just kind of winging it. So definitely take the time to do it. I would say right before the interview, maybe 30 minutes so it's fresh, or set some time aside, but definitely be prepared. The other thing, be on time to your interview as well. I know this is an easy one, like meetings, interviews, whatever you have something scheduled for, be on time. But hey, life happens. You show up late, you got caught, someone's talking to you while you're walking to your interview or something, but make sure you apologize too. I think that is something that a lot of people just like go in like, oh, hey, let's just go. We're on a time crunch, 30 minutes an hour, whatever it is. But go in, apologize for being late, and continue with the interview. Don't just like skip it and shove it to the side like it didn't happen. The candidate knows you were late. They were on time. So what's not your excuse, but acknowledge it.
Totally. And just to be clear, you're talking about from the hiring manager side, right?
Yes.
I think all of us
both ways, but yes, I'm referring to the manager side.
For sure. But to your point, I think all of us are conditioned as a candidate to a job interview to, apologize if we're late or, like send a note ahead if we're running behind or whatever it might be. I mean, that's kind of like pretty common knowledge. But to your point, I think a lot of hiring managers maybe don't think that that's as important as it really is. Again, it signals to the person, especially if it's a first interview and they've never actually met with you, with your company. This is their first impression as a candidate. It signals to them that you don't value their time when you don't acknowledge that you showed up 5 or 10 minutes late and you just jump right in and start grilling them with questions, right? So I think it's super important. I also think, to your point, the preparation piece is not always happening. Oftentimes it feels like as a candidate that the hiring manager has seen your resume for the first time in real time, as they're coming to the interview. And again, that just kind of signals to the candidate that they're not as valued to you as a hiring manager, that they're a commodity. And, there's an endless supply of people that want this job. And again, especially in this market, but I would argue all the time, just be a human, right? It's super important to treat people as though you value their time. And frankly speaking, even if you don't value their time, game the system and act like you do, because that's what's going to get you, especially the best candidates. The last thing I'll mention here before we jump into some of these questions we're getting, and I really appreciate that we're getting questions today. Make sure and build in a buffer, right? Like as a hiring manager, to have a hard stop. So if you show up 5 minutes late, you got 30 minutes and you go 20 minutes of your own questions, and then you ask what questions they have with 5 minutes to go. And then, got to go. I got another meeting. Build a buffer in at minimum 15 minutes. I would argue longer than that. Of course, I'm a bit long-winded, so I might need more time, but make sure that you don't have hard stops scheduled on the back end of an interview, because, especially if it's a good conversation, you'll want that extra time. And I think we got to get to some questions, but that kind of goes to the last thing I would say as a best practice or a hack, if you will, as an interviewer or a hiring manager. Focus on the questions the candidate has. I personally believe that I'll learn way more about a candidate by the questions that they ask than the answers to the questions that I ask, right? Mm-hmm. Because a lot of us, we ask a question. There's some pretty standard questions out there. People know how to game that, or what, they want to tell you what you want to hear.
Yeah.
But you learn a ton about somebody based on the questions they're asking you in the interview. I think it's a completely underutilized aspect of learning about an individual in an interview, focusing on their questions. So build more time than just 5 minutes at the end for questions, because what you'll learn when you say at 5-minute mark, what questions you have, a candidate's going to look at the clock and say, oh, I think I'm all set. Thanks. Right. And you just miss a huge opportunity.
Yeah.
All right. We've got some questions, speaking of, from our audience here. So
cool.
Here we go. I have heard many different opinions on dress, especially for remote interviews. What do you look for and or suggest to candidates? This is a candidate related question. Or suggest to candidates for this. I guess also in the same topic, background filters, like them or not?
Ooh, do you like mine?
That's a filter?
Right? I know. I was on my one-on-one earlier with one of my colleagues, and they're like, where are you at? And I'm like, in my home office. A Zoom stock image. I liked it enough to use as my background. To answer your question, dress-wise, me personally, I would take it as an interview if you were going to be in person. Dress to impress. You always have the recruiter to lean on too, because if it is more of a casual environment and the expectation of you dressing to impress is going to make it awkward because it doesn't really tie into that, and their preference would be to dress casual, then do that. And I've seen both sides of it. So I would say lean towards asking the recruiter, but if you're not able to get a hold of them or anything, lean towards dress to impress.
Yeah, I agree. I'd say err on the side of conservative if you don't know, but to your point, Kelly, ask the recruiter, ask whomever you can. And again, it goes back to expectations. Expectations are critical on both sides of this. So as a candidate, try to find out, because to your exact point, if you show up in a suit and tie and they're in, a t-shirt with holes in it, it might cause a little bit of awkwardness that you could have easily avoided. So I think that's a great answer. With regard to filters, I'd say my kind of quick response to that is depends a lot on your office background, right? If it is your bedroom and it's like, a bunch of laundry on the bed or something to that effect, or, there are worse things to have in the background in your bedroom. But frankly, even just like a gaming system that looks like it's been used recently, I would argue, filter's not going to hurt you. It's going to be it's going to be probably the preferred thing to do. And, I'd say just keep that in your best judgment. Like Kelly's filter is great. There might be some filters that would be inappropriate, but for the most part, I think filters are fine. That's my thought on it. All right. So another question here, and I want to, Joe, I got to say, I love it, man. Typing locks of love is a joke, he said, as I mentioned that I'm actually donating my hair. So thanks for the comment, man. No, so Joe has on a serious note, if a job seeker is looking for flexibility in daily start times, should they make this request to HR/recruiting or directly to the hiring manager? That's a great question.
Yeah. I would say most often than not, the recruiter or HR should know what the schedule is like and if there's flexibility on that. If not, I would reach out to them first before answering it or before asking the hiring manager. And the reason why is because you want to spend your time with the hiring manager asking about the role. I understand the schedule is a part of it, but that's something that we can get. We want you to get into more other details that are going to be valuable for you versus that, hey, it's kind of like the benefits. Don't talk benefits with your hiring manager. Talk to the HR and the recruiter about it. And I feel like this schedule topic goes under that.
Yeah. No, I agree. And I should mention that Joe is a former leader and I still consider him to be a mentor. So I think that, I learned some of this stuff I learned actually from him. But to your point, Kelly, that's exactly how I would answer it. There are questions that you want to ask that are important and you probably want the answers to on the front end of a process. And then the questions from a benefit standpoint probably want to ask more toward the end. Now, that being said, and the reason I bring up Joe and I having worked together in the past is we share the belief that it's really important as a candidate to establish, upfront for your own self and for the sake of your job search, like what are the most important criteria for you? So for some, individuals, a schedule might be like one of the top criteria, whether it's, taking care of children or whatever it might be. Right. So if it's something that, would be a deal breaker, if there's not flexibility, then I think probably right at the beginning of that process with, to your point, Kelly, the recruiter, and to your point, if you can't get it from the recruiter, set the expectation why it's important to you with the hiring manager as right before you ask the question, because they need to know the context of why it's important. And again, you don't want to waste anybody's time. The last thing you want to do is go through, like you said earlier, 8 interviews, get to the end and find out they can't be flexible with your schedule. So that's how I'd answer that. So just for anybody who's just tuning in, I just want to revisit the fact that this is an Ask Me Anything. You're obviously here on my LinkedIn. This is Scotty John. I've got Kelly Sanchez, the head of talent acquisition at DigiCert. We're focused today on interview etiquette. We've kind of spent most of our time talking about the hiring manager and the company. We talked a little bit about how candidates can prepare as well. I think, with regard to what we had planned to cover, we've pretty well covered it all. Kelly, is there anything that we're missing? And then I just want to make the invitation real quick to anybody watching. If you have questions as it relates to this topic or frankly, any other topic that you want, the two of us to weigh in on, feel free to pop those questions into the comments section. Otherwise, we'll sign off here if you don't have anything else to mention, Kelly.
The other thing that I will add, and you actually mentioned it when you were sharing your example, is that don't come in just like blasting questions. Be prepared with your questions. However, have a conversation with the individual. No one likes to be interrogated, so don't do that. And the last thought that I'll add is put yourself in the candidate shoes. Like, how would you like to be treated? Like if someone showed up late, how would you see it? So that's what I would say. Treat people honestly how you would like to be treated in an interview during an interview.
Yeah, the golden rule. Well, again, the reason that we're talking about this is because the job market is tight, regardless of industry right now for knowledge workers. It's kind of a candidate's market, so to speak. So it's really important to put your best foot forward as a company and an interviewer. It's important to think through, how is your process coming across to a potential employee of your company? And we talked about this at the very top of our meeting today. It's the retention process starts at the interview. So we talk a lot about attracting talent. I would argue that onboarding and retention is the single best talent acquisition strategy. If you don't lose your people, you don't have to go get more. So think about that. All starts now. And we scratched the surface. There's a million things that we could talk about today with regard to, best practices in interviews. We didn't even get into STAR questions or, some of the other best practices. But again, we kind of shoot for a half an hour on these meetings. If anybody else has any questions, feel free to put them into the comments. Otherwise, you can, if you're watching this after the fact, after we're no longer live, we'd love to hear from you in the comments on topics you'd like us to cover or questions that you didn't want to ask live for the next time around. We do this every other Wednesday at around 11:30. And so if we don't have any more questions, we'll see you in 2 weeks.
Sounds good.
I guess we're good. Kelly, thank you again. As always, really appreciate you joining me. Have a great one. We'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Okay, sounds good. Bye.